Oh no.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Project SIP. This is our 11th episode. As you can see, Alex is not joining us this week. So a couple of us are going to be sharing moderator duties, and I'm going to start us off. I wanted to briefly touch on, the racial tension that we've been seeing across the nation. That's even more in the public eye this month than I think it was even at the beginning of the summer. Emotions are running high, and I wanted to ask Kylan how he's feeling in this time when we're seeing more images of Black men and women being killed by police. We're seeing heroes in the Black community, heroes in our overall culture being they're passing away. John Lewis, C.T. Vivian, Chadwick Boseman, John Thomas III, these heroes of the Black community. Can you kind of just tell us how you're feeling in this time?
Sure. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you to our viewers for joining us on this journey. For me, it's a very emotional time these past months. Amanda, you pretty much hit the nail on the button. Racial unrest, a lot of political tension, but for me, it's just a lot of death. When you're constantly seeing people, African-American people gunned down, many times unjustly, when you see, the racial tensions going on in this country, some of the rhetoric, some of the actions of our own government, it's very disheartening. And, every day to have to, suck it up and pretend that you're perfectly okay and soldier on to work and, sometimes deal with colleagues who are tone deaf and, who just think that you're fine and who can't understand what's going on. You can't necessarily just scream and pull your hair out. You have to try to communicate, or in my case, a lot of times you have to just button it up and just zip it up all inside. But, it's definitely a trying time for me. It's been very emotional. It's been very disheartening, but at the same time, it also gives me a sense of hope that, with tragedy, comes an opportunity to bring in allies, to come together, to fight back, to figure out a way to make things better. And so, I'm not going to say I'm a blind optimist, but I do like to say that I like to believe that there's a way that we can fight evil with goodness and, strategize and organize and take control of the narrative of these situations of our country and put it in a direction that's positive, that's more equitable, that's more just. And that's what I'm really trying to focus my energies on to stay sane. So thank you for asking.
You're very welcome.
And if at all possible, just I'd like to close for a brief moment of silence for those that Amanda has mentioned that we've lost that have been prominent within our community. It is something that's heavy on our minds, and so just a brief moment of silence. Thank you so much, and I extend my same solitude to all the families that have been lost due to COVID, that have been lost due to unnecessary violence. Project SIP is with you, and we stand with you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Kylan. I know I speak for all of us when, I say that we don't fully understand, especially those of us who are not people of color. We don't fully understand everything that you're feeling, but we are trying our best to understand and be there for our friends and family members who are going through, those emotions in this type of trauma. Okay, so we are now going to move on to one of the bigger hot button issues that has been going on, and that is the shooting of Jacob Blake by the Kenosha Police Department. And so, there has been a lot of misinformation online about what happened, what preceded the events. But ultimately, we have a man who was shot in the back 7 times. And so I wanted to actually start with Robert, and I wanted to ask you, especially because I know that you reviewed the dispatch on the police scanner. Do you think it was reasonable for the officer to shoot 7 times in the back, given what you've seen and what you've read about?
No, I don't think that police shooting anybody in the back 7 times is the right thing to do in any situation. I think the problem that we have is with the current laws and what police are allowed to do in that type of situation, which unfortunately will most likely make it justified in the situation. But no, I don't think it was the right thing for the police officers to do.
What do you think the officers in that case should have done differently?
Well, we had seen the officers from the second footage that was released of them trying to detain Mr. Blake. We know that the taser did not work. I think that the officer that was holding on to Blake's shirt should have done more to try to detain him than holding him by his shirt. I mean, I'm a wrestler, so I mean, something I would do would be to go for somebody's legs, you know. I don't think that holding somebody by their shirt is the best solution in that situation. So I think that the officer should had tried to do more to actually restrain him from trying to enter the vehicle.
So, Jake, what are your thoughts on this?
So the cops didn't know what was in the vehicle. It could have been a gun, it could have been a knife, it could have been nothing. And it was the imminent threat was due to the immediate proximity of the cop. If the cop had taken 3 steps backwards, the imminent threat was gone. And there's pretty clear explanations on the continuum of force and when and where a cop is allowed to apply a certain amount of force and how they should escalate or de-escalate. And it's not generally that they should escalate. They're supposed to meet a certain kind of force with a certain kind of force. And there's an obvious laughable escalation from grabbing his shirt to opening fire and you know, a taser, a baton, a body slam, taking several steps back and putting a vehicle between you and them so that if he does have a gun, he's not going to open fire and hurt you. There's a handful of ways that the cops could have dealt with that didn't jump to potentially deadly force.
Do you think it matters that there's been kind of a dispute factually about whether or not there was a knife in the car versus a knife already in his hand as he was walking to the door of his car? So
within 20 feet distance, if a cop has their gun holstered and somebody has a knife, the cop is in danger. That's you can close that distance before the gun is up and at an appropriate angle. But walking away is not a sign of danger. So if he had the knife in his hand and he was going to go into his car, then the knife is not a threat. There's no implied threat there. If he got in the car and locked the door, he's still, they know who he is. They've got a license plate. He had kids in the car. There's so many things wrong with opening fire in this situation that it sounds like, I mean, somebody playing a video game, right?
Tyler, did you want to jump in on this at all? Oh, you're muted.
Of course, I'm still muted. I was going to actually bring up the whole entire thing about the kids that Jake brought up at the end. Was in any scenario of a cop feeling threatened, you should take the occupants in the car that you're shooting at into everything when you're shooting into a car full of people. If he did feel threatened that he had a gun, you should at least, or a knife or any kind of weapon, you should as Jake said, hey, let's take a step back. Let's get behind another car. Let's make sure we get him away from the other occupants in the vehicle, because you can create more casualties by injury or death by shooting it into a car full of people. And it shouldn't have been that way.
Robert, do you agree with Tyler's take on that?
I partially do, but one of the things I had heard from a YouTuber who is bringing up a criminal defense attorney had brought up the point that what could have happened if Jacob Blake had put those kids' lives in danger by, you know, running from the police, or the fact that he had already been in prior domestic disputes, that he could have used the kids as some kind of ransom or some kind of defense for him to get free. I'm not saying that Jacob Blake would have murdered his own kids, but there is the aspect of him hopping into a vehicle and getting in a high-speed chase with kids in the car, or him using them as some kind of shield to protect himself from the police. So that was just another aspect that I wanted to also touch on from the opposite
Is that
side.
pure? But is that something that the cops would have had? Like, did they know that then, or was this speculation after the fact?
I don't know if the officers knew, but I mean, the officers were fighting with Jacob Blake right next to the car. I mean, I'm not 100% sure if
Sure.
the kids were crying or screaming, or if the officers knew. But there is also that aspect of if the officers did know, that could be something that could come into play. But I do not 100% know if the officers knew that there was people in the car.
Amanda, I'm curious about reckless endangerment. Are cops opening fire with children in immediate proximity? Does that qualify as reckless endangerment? I mean, I believe Rittenhouse got charged with that for having somebody in something like line of sight behind.
Yeah, so I didn't print off for today's thing that charge, but reckless conduct in Wisconsin essentially includes creating an unreasonable risk to another person, an unreasonable risk to their safety. I mean, you think about, you know, imagine if the kids were not in the car, but were in the line of fire, or pedestrians, bystanders in the line of fire. That creates an unreasonable risk, you know, especially in a situation where, you know, the officers aren't being attacked. They don't see a gun. They're not, you know, they have somebody walking away with their back to them, you know, getting into a car. So I obviously, it's very difficult to get cops charged with crimes at all. But in my opinion, from an outsider's perspective, I'm not a Wisconsin attorney, that definitely looks reckless to me. So, and then I think we had a comment from Daniel, one of our guest panelists. He said, why are we talking about what could have happened as a justification for what did happen? Charles, what are your thoughts on that? And let me know if you'd like me to repeat the question.
Yeah, repeat the question.
So this has to do with what Robert brought up that he saw online, you know, all the what ifs, you know, what if he used the kids as a shield? What if they got in a high speed chase? Should we be talking about what might have happened and but didn't happen in order to justify what the police officers did?
Personally, I don't feel that they should be talking about the what ifs, because we need to be focused on what happened. You know, now they're saying that he had a fight with the officers and he walked away. Now, if there's two officers there and you're walking away, there's time to get from the back of the car and across to the driver's side for them to do something to stop him besides pull a gun and threaten him. See, that's where my
And
you know, see,
well,
I've been in situations such as that, but not to the point where there was a gun drawn on me. But I've been in situations where I tried to walk away from a situation and they were aggressive enough not to allow me to.
Yeah.
So, and anytime there's more than one, you can believe that they can use some type of aggression to stop you from getting that far away after the first encounter. And that's where I have the issue.
Do you think that the officer who shot Jacob Blake should be charged with a crime?
I do, because after the initial encounter at the back of the car, he had his gun out. They had tried nothing to stop him. He pulled his gun and then told him to stop and followed him behind him all the way around the car. There are ways that they could have stopped him before it ever got to that point. That's my point of the whole situation. They let it escalate to him getting in the car.
So I kind of see Kylan kind of nodding along. Is there anything you want to add to this?
Well, for me, I want to see some consistency for once. When we think about Jacob Blake, when we think about countless, African Americans and persons of color that have been denied their right to due process, that have been denied their right to a jury of their peers, that have been denied their right to a defense due to, either a vigilante or a police officer, being judge, jury, and executioner. And yet when I watch video after video of individuals that are not of color, being patiently walked down, who have committed murders, and they're found in the woods and they're set down giving water, when they point their guns at cops, when they steal cops' cars and drive away and almost drive over cops, they're taken in alive. They don't have the shit beat out of them. They're not bloody. They're not beaten. They don't get their neck kneeled on. They don't get their spine severed. I just, so when I keep hearing that it's a training problem and cops need more training, I don't buy that, because, it seems to me that in many situations that officers of the law have plenty of training and plenty of de-escalation techniques in certain situations. And in far too many situations, from what I see with my own eyes, I see no restraint whatsoever before, deadly force is resorted to. Kyle Rittenhouse, which we're going to talk about very shortly, after killing people, he got to walk right by, a line of cops in armored tanks as the crowd screamed he just shot somebody, and go home and sleep in his bed. But yet, if we want to talk about children, Tamir Rice in Ohio, within 1.3 seconds of the officer showing up in his car, shot the 12-year-old boy dead with a fake gun. And if we want to go a step deeper, one of the callers who called 911 said that he may think that it's a child, and he may think that that's just a toy gun he has. The dispatcher neglected to tell the officer that phrase, and that could have been the difference in that young man's life. So I just want to see some consistency when it comes to a 12-year-old boy, how we treat. And if we want to go,
Sorry.
I just want to see consistency when it comes to use of deadly force or use of force, period, across all spectrums, but I'll leave it there.
I want to jump to Stasia, and I want to know your thoughts on what Kylan just was talking about, this inconsistency that we see, especially in cases that make it to the media.
So the first thing that stands out to me is that we have been having this conversation actively for at least 5 years consistently. And I think it's amazing to me how people can still deny that inconsistency exists. That's all.
Tyler, did you have something to add?
I was going to say, there is a case that happened literally a couple blocks from me with Andy Lopez in 2013, where he was playing around with a replica gun. It was essentially an airsoft gun that was resembling an AK-47, and within seconds of the sheriffs coming up to him, he was shot. And he was, what, a 13, 14-year-old kid? So, yeah, the consistency of it is we've been dealing with this for many years, not just in the last 5, 6, 7 years. We've been looking at this and watching this for decades. And the fact that people, as Stasia said, are still acting like this is normal life and this is okay is a problem for sure.
All right, so unless anybody else has any thoughts on this, we can move on to the next big piece of Kenosha, Wisconsin news, and that's Kyle Rittenhouse. So for our viewers, I gave our panelists some homework, and I apologize to them because it involved a fair amount of reading. And so essentially, my challenge to them for today is when we talk about this, to try their best to take politics out of it, try their best to look at what happened as objectively as they can, try to take emotions out of it. And, you know, Kylan's got his evidence right there. And, you know, try to put yourself in the mind of like, if I'm a juror on this case, how am I going to view this? And so I wanted to first just kind of make sure we all understand that we're going to kind of go through a little methodically in terms of the order of the 3 shooting victims. We have count 1, first-degree reckless homicide, Joseph Rosenbaum. Count 3, first-degree intentional homicide, Anthony Huber. And count 4, attempted first-degree intentional homicide of Gage Grosskreutz. I probably butchered that last name, but we're going to skip over the other 3 counts. So the first thing I wanted to say, or the first kind of question, would be to Robert. When we're talking about the first charge, the first alleged victim, you know, we have a situation with a 17-year-old kid who is heavily armed with this large weapon, and a man who is unarmed, but he's a grown man. I'm assuming, unless you tell me otherwise, that you've watched the videos and
Yes.
you've done your best to review the things that I sent. Do you think, based on what you've reviewed, that Mr. Rosenbaum actually posed a threat of death or great bodily harm to Kyle Rittenhouse?
Yeah, for sure.
Why?
When you look at Rosenbaum's actions, from him throwing an object to the prosecutor's complaint with him saying that he was continuing to approach a defendant and trying to get in the proximity of the defendant, and then you look at McGinnis's testimony, you can read that Rosenbaum had tried to reach for his weapon. And so in Wisconsin's self-defense law, anybody who is trying to disarm somebody from their weapon means that they are trying to arm themselves, which means that Rosenbaum was trying to arm himself with Rittenhouse's weapon. So looking at Rosenbaum's actions and how he was acting that night, I believe that if Rosenbaum were to get a hold of Rittenhouse's weapon, that he could very well have caused great bodily injury or killed Rittenhouse.
So there's a concept in Wisconsin self-defense law called provocation, which essentially is if you're the first aggressor, or if you do something to provoke an attack in some way, you are not entitled to claim self-defense. There's a witness named Jeremiah, another protester, who saw Kyle pointing his gun at protesters, including at Jeremiah. Somebody who was not doing anything illegal, was not a rioter, was not looting, was not destroying a business, was just going to his car. If, for example, if evidence were to be presented that Joseph Rosenbaum saw Kyle Rittenhouse pointing his gun at people, do you think it would be appropriate for Mr. Rosenbaum to attempt to disarm that person?
If he was doing that, but also under the provocation law, it also states that the privilege lost by provocation may be regained if the actor in good faith withdraws from the fight. So by Rittenhouse trying to run away and was then trapped in between the vehicles and Rosenbaum, I believe that Rittenhouse running away was his withdrawal from the provocation. And so since Wisconsin's self-defense laws are pretty broad, I believe that Rittenhouse still had defense to protect himself and kill Rosenbaum.
So actually, I did want to get to something that you just ended on, but Daniel in the comments said, I'm curious how throwing a plastic bag and approaching somebody constitutes a threat to someone's life. So Tyler, I want to go to you on that. What are your thoughts on that? And
That's it's overreaction. It's overcorrection. Yeah, if somebody's has a bag or you know, a rock or something like that, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're gonna be killed with that, especially if you have a gun. And I think that it's a maturity level with Mr. Rittenhouse, in that he didn't know what to do, and so the only thing he had to defend himself was the gun, and the fact that he had that at the time was a little bit more of an issue, because he felt like, as Robert said, that was what he could use to defend himself, because he felt like he was in danger. But the only thing he had was a gun. The only thing anybody else had was a bag or a rock or whatever. So it doesn't pass the sniff test for me. But
Stasia, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, just to kind of build on that a little bit. I mean, this is also somebody who claims to be a trained militia member, and so I find it hard to believe that of all of his training, he felt he needed to fire a rifle that close 4 times.
I think it was 5 times.
5 times.
5 times.
That again doesn't pass the sniff test for me.
So something that Robert said at the very end, that he thinks that Kyle had the right to kill Joseph Rosenbaum. Is there anybody who thinks, okay, maybe he didn't have the right to kill Joseph Rosenbaum, but he still had the right to physically defend himself in some way? So Tyler, you were kind of nodding your head emphatically there.
I mean, yeah, if he needs to defend himself, he can defend himself. But I mean, like I said, it's a little bit of an overcorrection if you're using your gun and they don't have a gun, or they're just fighting you with a bag or a piece of paper, or even glass for that matter. Like if they had a glass bottle and they were using that doesn't necessarily constitute coming at him with a gun.
I mean, you can hit somebody with the barrel of a gun and take them out.
I think we're forgetting though that under the criminal complaint, it says that he was trying to reach for the weapon. So I mean, after the throwing of the bag and him chasing after somebody with a gun and then reaching for the weapon, I mean, it's not just that he threw a bag and he shot him. I mean, Rittenhouse
But
was
he's also,
He wasn't reaching for the gun.
Yeah, it says in the under McGinnis's testimony, he had said that Rosenbaum was trying to reach for the barrel of the gun, and the detective had asked if he had grabbed the gun, and McGinnis had said he did not touch the gun, but it to him how it seemed that was Rosenbaum was reaching for the weapon.
Right. My point is that his reaching for the weapon was to get it away from him and in self-defense.
Yeah, but if you're trying to disarm somebody under Wisconsin law, that means that you are trying to arm yourself, which means that if you're trying to arm yourself, that means that you are technically, if Rittenhouse hadn't done anything wrong and Rosenbaum was trying to arm himself with the weapon, then that means that Rittenhouse's life would be in
What?
imminent danger by somebody else taking his gun.
Can you
The
That's,
only
point
that's a
problem,
weird implication.
Hold on, a little crosstalk. Stasia first.
That's the law. I mean, you could say it's a weird implication.
Wait,
but
hold
that's-
on.
sorry.
Can you
Stasia.
point this law? Like what is the statute?
The statute of what?
The law that you just said.
Well, you could read it. It says that it's a broad law.
What is it?
I think Stasia specifically, so for example, I gave you guys the self-defense statute. It's the Wisconsin statutes 939.48. And so I think what Stasia is asked, I don't know if anybody has a computer up. In my research, I didn't find anything saying that attempting to disarm somebody means you're trying to arm yourself. And I think part of what Robert, you just mentioned was if Kyle is not a threat. And I think that's the issue. Was he a threat? Was he perceived as a threat? Was he presenting himself as a threat in that scenario to where somebody might be justified in attempting to disarm him?
Yeah,
and that was the only thing I was going to say was if Kyle, Mr. Rittenhouse, was pointing a gun at the first victim, that would I would want to try to defend myself, and that would be one of the ways that I would do it. So it can work in both ways. He would feel like he was trying to defend his life by trying to move the gun or take the gun from Mr. Rittenhouse.
So I know Jake wanted to say something about this.
I'm a little baffled as to how he can claim self-defense when the weapon he used was he wasn't legally allowed to possess and had already committed numerous crimes just by having across the state border. Like, I realize, it's suddenly he's in danger, but the concept, okay, I guess my problem is if you've already committed a crime, like he aimed the gun at people, that's a crime. So if he did that and then splits, that's fleeing the scene of a crime. That's again just another illegal thing. So how come we aren't talking about it as this fellow is trying to apprehend a criminal?
He didn't bring the weapon over state lines though. It was one of his friend's weapons.
There's a dispute about that. So his side is saying the gun was always in Wisconsin, and there's been stuff in the media saying his mom drove him from Illinois with the gun. So there's
But the media doesn't know anything about that. I mean, how does the media know that he had brought the weapon across state lines?
Hence the factual dispute.
That's not really
Okay,
that's not really factual. Just because
Yeah.
the media said something doesn't mean it's true. I mean, if his attorney is saying something, that would be the only thing that would actually be substantial evidence.
But it's irrelevant because whether it came across state lines or not is one thing. Him possessing it at all as a minor is another. It's still illegal.
But that doesn't matter. I mean, I've watched plenty of cases where somebody has broken the law, and whether it's a felon carrying a gun and they end up murdering somebody, they get off scot-free because just because they were committing a crime doesn't mean that they can't claim self-defense. And that's why I keep saying Wisconsin's self-defense law is very broad, where there's nothing in the Wisconsin law saying that if you are committing a crime, then you can't defend yourself against an attacker.
So speaking of Wisconsin state law, we have the statute here. It's 941.21, has to do with disarming a peace officer. So basically, if Kyle had actually been a peace officer, he'd been an officer of the law, and Joseph Rosenbaum tried to disarm him, that would be a totally different story. But that's not what we have here. And so
yeah, I can't find it, but I'd gotten this from an attorney that works in Wisconsin, so I can find it, but I wasn't talking about that in general. But.
Okay. So I think we had a comment from Daniel saying, is there any relevance to purposefully putting yourself in a situation where you might need to defend yourself? So for example, There's a video of him taken by Richard McGinnis where Kyle is saying he intends to use lethal force. And this is kind of before he's interacted with any protesters, and he's seen pointing his gun at protesters before the shooting, protesters who were not approaching him. So we haven't heard from Jules yet. So Jules, I want to know what you think about that.
Well, there's witness accounts of him having pointed his weapons at people from across the street. There's witness accounts of Rosenbaum basically saying, "Shoot me then," or something. I'm paraphrasing, but because he had the weapon pointed at his face, altercations, and I also think Wittenhouse had gone there in order to. Well, he said he went there in order to help protect businesses, right? But in Wisconsin, you cannot protect other people's properties with lethal force if that property does not belong to you. So what he was going there for was to at least threaten and possibly harm, it seems, because he went there with a weapon going maybe across state lines. I guess that's suspect. Maybe he didn't take a gun across state lines. Maybe he did. Regardless of that, he was a minor with a high-powered military-grade weaponry that he should not have been handling at all, and he had done that with the intent to cause some sort of harm, or at least threaten harm on a wide scale. It seems to me that his intention in being there was not very honest in terms of, I want to protect other people's businesses, because you can't do that with lethal force. You can only do that if you own the business or if you run the business and you are inside the business, not outside protecting random businesses, just out of your own conscience about maybe some people might bash in the windows, maybe they might get looted. Well, they have insurance to cover that, hopefully, especially the bigger businesses. I don't know. His reasons for being there seem disingenuous to me in general.
And the law you referenced, I'm sorry, Kyle, and we'll get to you in just a second. The law you referenced, that's Wisconsin Statute 939.49, and that essentially says that you can't use deadly or force that could cause death or great bodily injury for the sole purpose of defending your property at all. And you can't defend property, period, if it's not yours or you don't work for them. And so, Kylan, you wanted to jump in on that?
Well, I just think, I just want to, get back, as a juror, I take this seriously. So I just want to get to the facts of the matter. And so with any jury, with any defense, and with any prosecution, the prosecution's job is to present the facts of the case to what they feel is charged by law enforcement. And the jury's job is to deliberate the facts. And so the facts of count one are: the above named defendant on or about Tuesday, August 25th, 2020, in the city of Kenosha County, Wisconsin, did recklessly cause the death of Joseph D. Rosenbaum under circumstances which show utter disregard for human life, contrary to section 940-02, 939-503B, 939-631B, Wisconsin statutory, a class B felony, and upon conviction may be sentenced to a term of imprisonment not to exceed 60 years. And further, invoking provisions of 939.63 Wisconsin statutes, because the defendant committed this offense while using a dangerous weapon, the maximum term of imprisonment for the felony may be increased by not more than 5 years. And so those are the facts of the charging document that the state is presenting. And so our job as jurors is to not defend Mr. Rittenhouse. This exercise is to determine the facts as they're presented, and so it's our job as jurors to listen to what's going to be charged. These are very substantive and serious charges that are being presented by the prosecution, by law enforcement. And law enforcement, compared with the videos that they've seen and the interviews that they've done with witnesses, thinks that Mr. Rittenhouse acted in a way that recklessly caused the death of Mr. Rosenbaum. And so that's what we're considering. And we have to make sure that we're keeping an open mind to listen to evidence, not making sure that we're not defending him, because we're not defense attorneys, we're jurors right now. And so I just want to just remind everyone that we're here to listen to the facts. And, this gentleman has been charged, with first-degree reckless homicide, with attempted first-degree intentional homicide, and first-degree, recklessly endangering safety. So there's 6 counts that he's being charged with. They're very serious. And so, our job as jurors is to look at the evidence, not to acquit him.
And not to be an advocate for either side, but I do want to remind everyone that he is entitled to the presumption of innocence, which essentially means that if he eventually goes to trial, the jury is going to be instructed that they are required to assume and believe that he did act in lawful self-defense unless the government proves that he did not. And so I wanted to go to Charles to see what he thought about the interaction between Kyle and Mr. Rosenbaum. And do you think that, okay, let's say you think, okay, he needed to protect himself. He believed it. He genuinely believed it. Do you think his belief in the need to use deadly force was reasonable, or what do you think it was reckless?
It was reckless. It also says adequate provocation is not an affirmative defense in this charge. So just throwing something at someone, that's not a defense for that, to kill someone. He was not threatened besides someone chasing him.
That's a pretty big threat. I mean, when you're chasing somebody when
But
you got
he's
a weapon.
unarmed. He's armed. The other guy's unarmed.
Yeah, but you could still take his weapon, or I mean, you could cause great bodily injury. You don't have to have a weapon to cause great bodily injury to somebody.
Okay.
Just because somebody has a weapon and one other person doesn't.
Let's let Charles finish his point.
Yeah, let's let him finish his thought.
Yeah, my thing is, if I've sat before jurors before, and what I do know is they're not worried about whether I'm threatened or not. If I'm being threatened with another weapon, that's one thing. But to be threatened with a paper bag, bottle, that doesn't justify having a murder case. And they will tell you that every day.
So Robert, I wanted to come to you really quickly, because part of the law about self-defense involves an analysis of excessive force, because Kyle does shoot Mr. Rosenbaum 5 times. One of those is in the back, according to the autopsy report. And so what any jury is going to have to analyze for him was his belief that he needed to shoot that many times, and shoot in the back, and shoot in the pelvis, or actually shoot at this man's head at one point. Was that belief reasonable? Because if that belief is not reasonable, that he has to go that far, then he committed the crime.
Well, don't they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there was the lack of self-defense?
That's what I'm saying. So if looking at the evidence, okay, so the evidence that we have before us obviously is not going to be everything that they have in 6 months to a year when this potentially goes to trial. But you have a situation where he's shooting an unarmed man multiple times, because that man had been kind of coming after him, but hadn't been punching him, hadn't been, he threw a plastic bag and he was reaching for the gun. Do you think it was reasonable for Kyle to think, I need to shoot this guy 5 times, including a shot to the head, a shot to the back? Do you think that was reasonable? Or do you think he maybe should have just shot 1 time? Because if you think that's not reasonable to shoot that many times, then they have met their burden on that element, essentially.
I think that if Kyle felt that his life was in danger, then he needed to take it as many shots as he needed to protect his life.
But at some point, yeah. So Stasia, sorry,
right. But for me, I do not believe that he needed to take 5 shots to protect his life.
What's the difference between 4 or 5 shots?
What's the difference between 1 and 5? What's the difference?
Because one shot might not kill him.
You don't need to kill him. You just need to disable him.
Maybe he did. Maybe he did have to kill him. Maybe if he did only shoot him once,
You have to
if you
kill
did
an unarmed man.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds like,
Sure,
like an action movie fantasy all of a sudden.
I mean, this is Wisconsin law. I mean, Wisconsin law doesn't say that you have to only shoot somebody 2 times or only 3 times. Wisconsin law says you have the right to protect yourself. I mean,
Not at all costs.
But it says the amount of force you use must be reasonable under the circumstances, and that reasonableness must be based on other people looking at the situation, and not just what.
And it's objective. It's a hybrid of objective and subjective. And so if I were to look at myself and I was seeing somebody that was going to attack me, like as it says, any reasonable person, and if I was in that situation and I felt that my life was in danger, then I would have to shoot as many times as I had to put the threat down. I mean, it's not like
in the back. He shot him in the back. I mean, he's not a threat
well,
facing the other way with bullets.
But hold on a second. Just because somebody gets shot in the back doesn't mean that he shot him while he's facing the other way. All the bullets that hit him, it was most likely because he was reaching for the gun and his back was at a certain angle. It was never that Rosenbaum was looking the other way and he just popped him one time in the back. It was that Kyle Rittenhouse had taken those 5 shots in a quick rapid succession, and maybe one of those bullets as Rosenbaum was falling had gone into his back. There's no evidence to suggest that
a bullet, he would have gone down with 1 shot. That's all I'm saying.
How do you know that?
Are there any witness statements that?
Hold on a second. What's his name? Grosskreutz had got shot 1 time. Did he go down and die?
We'll get to him.
I know, but I'm giving you. I know, but I'm giving you evidence that just 1 shot doesn't always mean that it's going to put them down.
Well, hold on. We'll get to that. Okay. It depends, obviously.
Is there any corroboration with his statement that he was going for the gun? Did anybody witness that specifically?
Yes.
And
yes.
So that's Richard McGinnis. So that came from Richard McGinnis. He's the conservative reporter for the Daily Caller who had been following Kyle around that night, and was actually following Joseph Rosenbaum at that point. And it was a situation where the first shot he thought he got hit, and it and that I think was probably the one that grazed Mr. Rosenbaum's leg.
Well, I think it was the one that hit the ground, I think is what he said. I think it was the bullet that hit the ground he thought hit him, and it could have been some kind of deflection from the ground or gravel coming up from the bullet hitting the ground. Because when you look at the video, McGinnis was 100 on the opposite side of Rosenbaum, and that's what the second charge is because McGinnis was technically in the line of fire of Rittenhouse's shots on Rosenbaum.
Yes. So Tyler, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say this. So if Kyle, let's put it this way, Kyle felt like his life was in danger because somebody who was bigger than him, was an actual adult, was threatening him. And to Robert's point, if Kyle, he had the gun, he felt like he was in danger because somebody bigger than him was coming after him and was coming after him in a threatening manner. Especially if what kind of gun did he have? Was it, I haven't found any confirmation of that. That's what I was saying. I've seen a couple reports about an AK-47, but some other reports of other things. So
AR-15-223.
That's what I'm saying. Like it was mostly that what I was saying. So I need to confirm exactly what gun you had. If it's an AR, it doesn't take that much to get multiple shots off. And we don't know we don't have the evidence of which bullet hit him first in a way, because to Robert's point, he could have been fallen and gotten hit in the back as the trigger was being pulled. So we don't know that as well. But to Robert's point, if he felt like he was going to get pummeled by this guy who was bigger than him, he needed to shoot him until he went away. And that's kind of that would be a defense for Mr. Rittenhouse in that circumstance.
Yeah. So Kyle, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so I'd like to, just again, as a juror, it's going to be my responsibility to determine what constitutes as reasonable. There's going to be many experts that are going to be testifying, on both sides saying, expert for the prosecution says that this was not a reasonable, assertion that he was going to die. This may not, this may have been excessive. And so there's going to be, experts that in testimony that's going to need to be, deliberated upon by the jury. I'd like to pose a question to Stacia in this regard. I would love for you to expound on your thoughts on what is reasonable, because, if civilians can now have the same loose interpretation of fearing for their life as our nation's police, we're in a very dangerous point in society. I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Stacia, as it pertains to the law itself.
So, I mean, my take is that it was not reasonable, because here is an unarmed person who threw a plastic bag at you. I don't see any evidence that he would have believed that the person wanted to kill him. They could have, a person can be following you. I see, there are riots, there's people running everywhere. I get that. But I don't think, from what I have read and the statements and even Kyle's statements, that he honestly believed that that person was going to kill him, and he had to shoot him 5 times to get him.
Could you repeat that last part?
Oh, could you repeat that last part? You kind of cut out.
Oh, sorry. I do not, based on what I have read about from the witness statements, the complaint, Kyle's statements and interviews, I do not believe that he reasonably believed that his life was in danger. And the use of force, the 5 shots, that seems intentional to me. And I just don't think it was reasonable.
So, Jules, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm wondering, in terms of Wisconsin law, what it makes a reasonable attempt of self-defense. Because if Kyle Rittenhouse was pointing a weapon at Rosenbaum and multiple others at that time, couldn't Rosenbaum's attempt to disarm him be taken as self-defense itself? And throwing a bag at him, if he's running away, he's running away from a crime, if that is the case, right? If he's running back through the parking lot and Rosenbaum is chasing him because perhaps Rosenbaum's motivations, this is speculation, obviously, and I probably shouldn't, but he's thinking this guy is dangerous. He's pointing guns at people. And wouldn't pointing a gun at somebody in itself be a form of assault?
Yes. So there is a law that it actually, in the self-defense statute, it mentions that intentionally pointing a firearm at another constitutes a violation of section 941.20, which is endangering safety by use of a dangerous weapon. So it is a crime in Wisconsin to point a gun at another person intentionally.
Which is what he did. And that is corroborated that he had been doing that.
So, Jake, do you want to say something?
Yeah, a couple of things. Talking back about the Jacob Blake situation too, having a gun present in the situation ramps up the tension completely. And I think both of these situations, it's pretty obvious that having a gun involved was a mistake. But right? We all agree with that, right? Fantastic. I think that it's not unreasonable to look at the situation and say, okay, Rosenbaum saw a high tension situation, somebody he didn't know aiming a very serious weapon at a group of peaceful protesters, or maybe even people who weren't protesting. I'm not entirely sure about that. Was Rosenbaum protesting there, or was he just present?
I believe he was a protester.
No. Okay, so the act of aiming a gun is an assault and is a crime. And I don't think it's unreasonable to think that Rosenbaum was acting, at least in his mind, as like a hero trying to disarm a potentially active shooter. Once the crime has been committed, if this guy just runs away over there, we can, I guess, be very generous and consider that what was the word for it? Like trying to de-escalate the situation. But if if Rosenbaum is concerned that this person is a potentially active shooter and he runs away and does it again over there, again, I think Rosenbaum pursuit in that situation makes total sense. Whether he should have been shot multiple times, I just have to cycle back to, if you have a gun in your hands, you're massively more likely to use it. And a high-powered gun allows for something like 5 shots in a split second, a little bit easier than, say, a pistol.
So I wanted to talk about what happened immediately after he shot Joseph Rosenbaum. So he, instead of calling 911, he calls the police and he says, I just killed somebody.
He called his friend.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. He called his friend. I realized I repeated myself there. So he calls his friend and says, I just killed somebody. He doesn't call the police immediately. And there was a witness, I think the medic, another medic who was nearby, who said he seemed freaked out, like he knew he messed up. And even the other members of the Kenosha Guard were like, what did you just do? Like they realized something was wrong. And so Kyle is, you know, he's starting to leave the situation. I want to know from Charles, do you think that Kyle's conduct immediately after shooting Joseph Rosenbaum, do you think that that means anything? Do you think it shows that he knew that he committed a crime, that he did something wrong, or do you think that was a natural reaction?
Anytime you are a criminal and you do something, your first thought is leave the scene of the crime. I wouldn't care what anybody else says. If you do something and you know that it's wrong, you're going to try to get somewhere so you can collect your thoughts and set up a game plan to make yourself look good.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, totally.
Well, I would think that his direct action of running around the car and going back and checking on the individual would be an exact example of him not running away from the scene, because if he was running away from the scene, he would have just kept running around the car and not even going back and checking on the individual. I mean, from the testimony of his attorney, we can see from McGinnis's testimony, he had said that other people were moving towards the defendant. We also have in the criminal complaint a group of several people running behind the defendant, heard yelling what sounds like beat him up, get him, get that dude. Then we have people swinging at the defendant, people yelling get his ass. So I think it's pretty fair to say that Rittenhouse was in fear again for his life after a mob started chasing after him.
So I have a question about, oh yeah.
Clarify, Robert, the reason why they were saying get his ass and they were chasing him, this was after the fact that he had already shot someone.
In self-defense.
The crowd that is chasing him is aware that he shot someone and they're trying to disarm him because at that point he had killed somebody and they want him disarmed. And so that's something that has to be taken into consideration, are the things why certain things are happening. And again,
Yeah, I agree. And I believe
facts come out.
I agree,
So
I'm going to say that it was under self-defense.
Well, hold on, because self-defense is in his mind at this point.
What'd you say?
Sorry, Kyle.
What'd you say, Jules?
I said that's an assumption.
Yeah.
Aren't we all here?
But everybody around him was like, that dude just killed somebody.
No, he didn't.
Wait, guys.
Hold on. We are kind of
I'm making
operating
an assumption and you're not.
No. Anybody who is going to say, well, but Kyle just acted in self-defense, why are they coming after him? That's assuming that they know he acted in self-defense. From their perspective, they don't know what's in his head. So when it's, there's this mob of people, rioters or whoever coming after him, we have to look at it now from their perspective. Why are they going after him? Because they just saw somebody get killed, or were just told this guy got killed, or just heard Kyle say, I just killed somebody. And there are people hearing the Kenosha Guard kind of freaking out now about what Kyle has done. And so they start pursuing him.
Yeah, so we have to
that doesn't give a right though. I mean,
it does actually, because it's about what's in. So the person who's
it's about what they assume. I mean, because
it's not about what they assume. It's about their state of mind based on what they have observed. none of us are mind readers, right?
Mhm.
None of us are in Kyle's head, and none of those people were in Kyle's head. They didn't know what he was thinking or feeling. They only know what they saw, what they heard, and what they heard come out of his mouth. And so I want you to kind of put yourself in their position for a moment, kind of do this little thought experiment. You're, you know, or maybe even switch the roles, right? In terms of which side did the shooting. So they have every right under the law to pursue who they perceive to be an active shooter. They don't know that he, in his mind, has thought, I just needed to defend myself. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, I totally understand that aspect of it. But if he did act in self-defense, and the people were chasing after him, I don't see how that argument could work. I mean, I think it's just an aspect of us having two different opinions on it. And I'm not saying that they couldn't think that and they couldn't try to stop him. That's very well that they could do that.
So then let's move on to the next victim, okay? So one of those people trying to stop him, one of those people who thought he was an active shooter was Anthony Huber. And Anthony Huber was shot in the chest one time and is the basis of count 3, first-degree intentional homicide. So I want to go to Jules, if you are ready for this. Do you think that it was reasonable for Kyle to shoot Anthony Huber, and why or why not?
Well, I don't think it was reasonable for him to shoot. I don't think it was reasonable for him to shoot Kyle because it didn't seem to me that. Okay, so Kyle acted in this way because he basically felt this man is very, very dangerous. He had already shot somebody. He had already killed somebody. He had already called his friend and said, hey, I've killed somebody. He didn't call the police. Clearly, Kyle was under the impression that this person very well could kill again. I think he came, excuse me. Anthony was under the impression that he could kill again. So in your write-up, you say it's a imperfect self-defense, right? So if Kyle,
so let me explain that. Yeah,
why don't you explain that?
Yeah, why don't I explain that? So for the second charge that we're talking about, intentional homicide, they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he intended to kill Anthony Huber. It is a defense if he acted in what we call perfect self-defense, where he believed he needed to use, there was a danger to him of death or great bodily injury, and that he reasonably believed that he needed to use the amount of force he needed to use. That is the defense that his attorneys are presenting. They have the option of presenting imperfect self-defense, which is basically, I genuinely believed that I needed to do what I did, but I recognize that one of my beliefs may have been unreasonable, and that reduces it to second degree. So then take it away, Jules. That makes sense.
Right,
Yeah.
okay, so let's see, the circumstances of Anthony Huber, he had a skateboard, and he had, I think, apparently heard that this man, Kyle, was coming around with a gun. He had already killed somebody, and so they had a physical altercation. I think he had pushed him. Kyle had pushed him, I think, is the way it went, and Huber was there with his girlfriend, and they had sort of seen him fleeing the scene, basically, or at least from their perspective, they were fleeing the scene. So Kyle said he had shot him because, hold on, I'm
pulling up the statement.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
So Huber's girlfriend says that Huber was acting in a way to protect her. He thought Kyle was a threat. He had a skateboard in one hand and he started to reach for the gun with the other hand, maybe to grab it, maybe to push it away. Hard to say. Either way, he ended up getting shot. And Huber was killed. Let's see. The statement says Huber was killed. The suspect fled the scene of Rosenbaum's shooting. And a reporter following close behind Rosenbaum, who was on the ground, attempted to render aid. I'm getting behind here.
Okay.
Why don't you move on and I'll
Yeah. Okay. So Tyler, you're muted.
There I am. So I was gonna say, when we look at the video evidence of what happened, so he just shot Joseph Rosenbaum, and he then runs around, freaks out, calls his friend saying, "I just shot somebody," and then he starts bolting in the other direction. He didn't necessarily give any aid or help with the situation with Mr. Rosenbaum. He just went in the other direction. As we've then started talking, everybody else sees him running and they keep hearing, "Hey, this is the guy that shot him." So it sounds like from this point forward, everything else that he has done in terms of shooting other people is founded, because at this point, he knows he shot somebody and he's running because he did shoot somebody, instead of staying at the scene and making sure that he said his piece of, "I was defending myself, I was defending myself, I was defending myself." Because not everybody in that scenario knew that at the time. Then, yeah, he's being attacked by other people trying to not necessarily put him down, but just the word I'm looking for, and I can't find it, but basically apprehend him in a way, kind of have like a citizen's arrest kind of thing, where they're trying to hold him there, saying, "This is the guy that shot the guy that was over there." Obviously, when you have somebody with a skateboard trying to come after you like that, that doesn't look very good. And unfortunately, Kyle thought it was reasonable to shoot that guy as well. That was Mr. Huber, right?
Yeah.
And that, again, it's just a cascading effect. Then you have more people thinking that you're just shooting people just because you're an active shooter now. And as we have seen in the past, people try to find active shooters and try to take them out, because you're just randomly going out and shooting people. So to protect other people that are around, people feel like they need to engage with you. And again, like I said, it just kept cascading to where we have other people being shot. And then there was a point where people just want to leave him alone and just be like, "The police are here, they're going to get him." And we know what happened next after that point. But like that's basically, I wanted to bring it back to, hey, he just shot Joseph Rosenbaum, exactly what he did, and then what happened preceding that.
So Jake, I think you wanted to touch on this as well.
Yeah, Tyler, I think you made an excellent point there, that the right response would have been like, maybe gun above his head, "I was acting in self-defense." Regardless of what was happening, like, people are saying, "Hey, we got to stop him." The running away is almost an admission of guilt. Like in most situations, if you flee, you're considered guilty. I think that, like, let's be super generous and say that he really definitely was acting in purely honorable self-defense. He believed he needed to protect himself. That first person fell to that. I mean, once that happened, we've got a group of people hearing, seeing, getting all these bits of information that suggest that Mr. Rittenhouse has killed somebody. As Amanda made it clear, that they're well within their right to pursue him and try to stop him. The unfortunate mental states of I've just defended myself and now I'm being aggressed by a much more dangerous dynamic paired with that guy's a problem, we have to stop him. I can see how that would lead to what is ultimately and almost inarguably an active shooter situation that can't resolve by the present powers. The fact that the police came in and did nothing is deeply upsetting.
Charles, did you wanted to get in on this one? You're muted. Make sure you unmute yourself. Can Jake, do you have the ability to? Oh, there we go. Okay.
All right.
Go ahead.
Okay. See, that goes back to my first point. Once he committed the first crime of shooting the guy, whether it was self-defense or whatever, when he decided that he was going to leave the scene, that was an admission of the crime. And that's always going to be the case. Because even as he was leaving, he passed the police and he still did not say, hey, I just shot this guy. And that's why these people are following me. See, he was going through the process of how am I going to defend myself with this action that I've just taken.
Yeah. So before we go back to Jules, I wanted to make sure, because we've been talking about these people pursuing. We have the third victim and the final homicide related count, and that's Gage. I'm not going to say his last name again because I will butcher it again. So he's a licensed paramedic. He's lawfully permitted to carry a gun. He doesn't have any felony convictions or anything that would disqualify him from gun ownership. It's an open carry state. And his role there is to help people and protect people. And a witness, another paramedic, said that, you know, medics regularly carry guns just for protection, but that she had never seen him pull it out at any point during their entire summer of attending protests. So Jules, let's go back to you. And I want you to kind of touch on the shootings of both Anthony Huber and Gage, noting that the government would have to prove that intent to kill, not just recklessness or, you know, carelessness or a disregard for human life, just specifically shooting to kill, and if it was reasonable for him to do that.
Okay, so as others have said, when he shot Anthony Huber, it does seem like, I guess, it's hard for me to put myself in the place of somebody in that mindset. However, if I had to shoot somebody in self-defense, I feel like I would put my gun down, wait for the police, and say, "Hey, you know, I've just taken a life. I need to make sure that, you know, my story is told correctly." And I guess, you know, I maybe there was a mob after him. I'm not sure if they were after him, but maybe if he had put his hands up and said, "Please call the police. I want to work this whole thing out," I think that might have de-escalated things quite a bit. Instead, he ran, which doesn't sound very good or look very good for his case of self-defense. So he ran. He encountered Anthony Huber. Huber thought this man is a threat. Tried to hit him with his skateboard. He gets shot. As far as Gage Grosskreutz, which is, I think how you're supposed to pronounce it, was he the one who was shot? Well,
he's shot in the elbow.
Was he the one who was shot in the elbow? Was he the one who was shot while the shooter was on the ground?
I believe
right?
both Anthony Huber and Gage were shot while Rittenhouse was on the ground. He had tripped and fallen. And there are images of Gage online where he does have a gun in his hand, and I think witnesses identified him as having it wasn't pointed at Kyle.
And look, for clarity, let me read something real quick so Jules can have context.
Please.
After shooting Huber, the defendant moves to a sitting position and points his gun at a third male, later identified as Gage Grosskreutz, who had begun to approach the defendant. When the defendant shot Huber, Grosskreutz freezes and ducks and takes a step back. Grosskreutz puts his hands in the air. Grosskreutz then moves toward the defendant, who aims his gun at Grosskreutz and shoots him firing one shot.
Yeah. As far as Grosskreutz goes, I could see that being maybe the most arguably self-defense of any of the shootings, simply because Grosskreutz was equally armed. However, at this point, he had already shot and killed 2 people. So calling that self-defense, maybe you could say that, maybe. But at this point, I think Gage Grosskreutz himself was committing an act of self-defense in defending himself for the lives of others, because he felt this man was already an active shooter. He had already killed, and he was very likely to kill again. If he got up, he could aim that gun again. He could very well kill again. And I think that was very well what Gage Grosskreutz had thought. He thought, at this point, this guy needs to be put down in at least some capacity. And he was shot in the arm, and he luckily survived because he was not shot multiple times. But it says, you know, Rittenhouse sat up and pointed his gun at Grosskreutz, who had started to approach him. Grosskreutz froze and took a step back, putting his hands up in the air. And then Grosskreutz moved towards Rittenhouse, who aimed his rifle and fired one shot, hitting him in the arm, which means he walked forward with his hands in the air. He may have had a gun, but he was not aiming his gun either. So I guess it depends on whether you think the very fact that he had a gun constitutes another act of self-defense on Rittenhouse's part, which it doesn't seem very likely. If Grosskreutz hands were up, it doesn't seem like that argument flies very far.
So, Robert, I know you have more to say, but I want to kind of ask about Gage. If we take politics out of this, do you think it's a fair characterization to call Gage a good guy with a gun?
Grosskreutz?
Yes.
I mean, I don't think he's a bad guy with a gun.
But does that mean you think he's a, you know, we always talk about when there's these mass shootings, where's the good guy with the gun, right? If we take politics out of this.
Yeah, if I believe that Rittenhouse wasn't acting in self-defense, then I guess Gage would be a good guy with a gun.
Well, and we have to analyze each incident kind of separately.
Well, I don't.
It was reasonable for him to believe at that moment.
I don't think that that's how they'll be arguing the case. From what I've read, is that they're not going to be breaking it down in each individual set. Since it happened in such a short amount of time, it's most likely that the prosecutor will be looking at it as one big incident instead of breaking down each individual incident, because it's such a small amount of time.
It is one continuous course of conduct, but in terms of deciding whether or not somebody is guilty or innocent of each count, that's what you have to analyze individually. For each person, each time he shoots somebody, what does the evidence show is going on in his head, and is it reasonable in that moment to outsiders, essentially?
Yeah, and I think that how this all works is the defense for Rittenhouse is mostly based around the first shooting, because, like I said, I believe that Rittenhouse's first shooting was justified. So then subsequently, everything after that, whether it's Huber hitting him over the head with the skateboard while trying to reach for the gun, or it's Grosskreutz who puts his hands up in the air with a pistol, but then takes a step towards Rittenhouse, shows that each one of these incidents was somebody trying to engage with Rittenhouse in a way that Rittenhouse felt like he had to protect his life.
So my last question to you, and then we'll go to Jake, is I want to talk to you about that imperfect self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that it's a possibility that one or both of his beliefs were unreasonable? So either that he was in danger, or that he needed to use the level of force that he used. do you think that it's possible that he could have been mistaken about, for example, the level of force he used in terms of the reasonableness of it?
Looking at it objectively, and it was me in this situation, I would be in the jury saying that Rittenhouse was innocent of, and he had committed, or he had acted in quote unquote perfect self-defense. And I think that's what his defense is saying from the testimony of his attorney on Fox, is claiming that Rittenhouse had acted in a perfect self-defense. And I 100% agree with that on every single count, except the gun charge, but we're not bringing that up.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Stasia, are you saying something?
No, sorry.
Okay, Jake.
So this is tragic and it sucks in a lot of ways. But the thing that really scares me is the potential for like a precedent to be set where, oh, you know, there's anti-maskers protesting, and I really fucking hate those people. So I'm gonna go show up and make sure they stay in line with my gun. And if I feel threatened, I'm gonna blast a few of them. Where I felt threatened. How is that not? I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm obviously making, no shit. This is a slippery slope. And I am not at all the type of person to even give a shit who's protesting where. I'm not going to go argue with somebody about their protest. But the reality is there are people out there who would totally capitalize on this potential gray zone. And that is a problem.
Well, I think in this instance, you know, we're all a mock jury, and I think we've all, you know, tried to, you know, work with the facts as best we can. Thank you, Amanda, for that.
You're welcome.
But a lot of this is still, I think a lot of this is still opinion that we're stating. The great thing is, you know, there's going to be an actual jury of his peers. He's going to be entitled to a defense. The prosecution is going to have an opportunity to present their case. And as the months go on, we're going to see exactly what's going to happen, if it's going to set a precedent, or if, you know, Rittenhouse is going to be found guilty. So, you know, a lot remains to be seen. I'm sure there's a lot of evidence that has not come out yet. I believe the prosecution hasn't even begun to just play all of their cards. And so this is going to be, you know, very interesting. We're going to get ready to go to the next topic, but I want to give one last opportunity for Stasia if she would like to jump in and see us off.
So Stasia, you, I know you wanted to talk about kind of reform in terms of police, you know, just kind of to bring this full circle to what happened with Jacob Blake. California on August 27th, the California legislature failed to pass some reforms that people call, you know, these are the George Floyd reforms in terms of policing. What do you want to say about that?
Yeah, so I mean, to be fair to the legislature, some bills did pass, but they were very much watered down. And one thing that I'm very disappointed about is that the idea of some kind of non-police and non-prosecutorial, meaning the DA's office, involvement and oversight of police officers. The fact that that was struck down and basically, you know, lobbied out of the legislature was really disappointing to me, because I think that is probably one of the best measures that we can use in the existing system.
Yeah. So Kylan, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I'm going to use much more layman's terms. I just thought it was total horseshit. You know, I thought it was total horseshit what happened, how it was slow walked and watered down at the end. Also, there was a lot of shenanigans that was going on to slow walk everything to make sure that the clock went past midnight. Some bills had the votes to pass and they weren't able to pass because they were a few seconds at midnight, because they were basically in essence filibustered, you know, for lack of a better word, into oblivion. And so I just thought that the people's business wasn't done, not because it didn't have the votes to pass, but because, you know, interested parties were able to gum up the works and prevent the people's business from being done. So I thought that was very disappointing and very depressing, and, you know, just another reason, you know, why we need to get, you know, special interests out of the political process.
So
Tyler. Yeah.
I was gonna say, whenever everything has happened this summer, just this summer, we'll put it to this. Me and my significant other were talking, and they were like, "Hey, what do you think about what's going to happen here in the future?" And I said, the same thing that happens every single time. Everything just gets drawn out. Some people make some statements. Some people make changes that we didn't ask for, and the changes that we're asking for never actually come into fruition. And California just proves my point that that's continued. It's going to be watered down or nothing at all. And it really is unfortunate that every single time but we as a people, we as a country come together and we all know that this is a problem and we need to fix it. And when we have the opportunity to fix something, nothing gets done. And it's very frustrating and very disheartening. And when it keeps happening to you, you get jaded about the fact that it's never going to happen. Oh, yeah, you keep talking that something's going to happen. You're just going to change Aunt Jemima or take something off of Land O'Lakes, or you're going to be Lady Antebellum and change your name because that's what we needed to do, not what was the reason why we're all protesting for justice right now.
So, Robert, final word on this kind of overarching topic.
Kind of just a quick point. I agree with everybody on the lobbying, and it is unfortunate that a lot of times in our state and even federal legislator that bills can't be passed. And I think the way that we go about fixing these problems is we get something done at the federal level for more criminal justice than just the First Step Act. And I think that if we can get something more along the lines federally done through our bicameral system in Congress, that maybe we could see those changes work its way down to the state level. I mean, I know that we are a federalist system, but I still believe that that if we get a good example done by the federal legislators, that it could work its way down.
That's a great point. So I'm going to kind of send this to Kyle in a moment, but there was a bill that did pass that is on the governor's desk, and that is to essentially allow inmate firefighters to get parts of their records expunged so that they can earn their EMT license and actually get jobs as firefighters, which is something that has been a huge problem.
Awesome.
Because Cal Fire is understaffed, and so many of their firefighters, inmate firefighters, are gone because they were released because of the pandemic. So, Kylan, we're going to have you talk about climate change, but I was wondering if you could kind of touch on what you think the impact of that bill is going to have on our state's ability to, fight fires while also supporting people who have given so much in order to pay their debt to society.
Absolutely, Amanda. And, I think this goes part into, criminal justice reform. And, just to let the audience know, even us as moderators and panelists have had some very robust discussions offline amongst ourselves regarding different avenues for criminal justice reform and how to reform the prison system. And some very eye-opening and enlightening things have been brought to my attention. And this is one of these things where we can make incarceration not just as punishment, but to provide avenues to make productive members of society. And AB 247, Assembly Bill 2147, is just that. It allows verbatim nonviolent offenders who have logged time in fire camps while incarcerated an opportunity to have their records expunged upon release, allowing them to become firefighters. And as Amanda alluded to, our firefighting corps has been decimated because it's been sad that we've had to rely so heavily upon incarcerated fire brigades to help fight fires for years. And when we talk about COVID, one of the populations, aside from the elderly in nursing homes that have been severely impacted, has been the prison population, whether it's Pelican Bay, whether it's San Quentin, whether it's Cedar Hills, all throughout the prison system in California, as well as nationwide. But in California particularly, inmates have been stricken with COVID and have been taken off the front lines. And now CAL FIRE is, scrambling, asking for out-of-state help to help fight these fires. And so, which kind of segues us into climate change, because this has also impacted the ability for us to discuss COVID, whether we're talking about, the increased frequency and strength of hurricanes, or the increased frequency and strength of tornadoes, or if we're talking about your home state of Arizona, Amanda, where we set a record in Phoenix of 34 days of 110-degree plus weather.
We're at 50 now.
We're not 50, so that's amazing. And so when we talk about climate change, I actually want to pose my first question to Jake. And with that, Jake, what are your thoughts on climate change as it relates to COVID? And this is a two-part question. And the second part of my question is, what are some concrete steps that you feel we can take as a nation to finally mitigate the climate crisis?
So, I mean, us here in California, COVID paired with climate change is kind of like a punch in the mouth. We don't tend to have air conditioning here, and it's we're going into a week that's going to have 105 in the Bay Area, where we're coastal and surrounded by water. So people who don't have air conditioning and are suddenly surrounded by heat can't open their doors because the smoke is problematic to everybody and very problematic to some. And you take it a step further with the power infrastructure in California. The heat wave means power outages, and that's like for most people it's an inconvenience, but for some people it's deadly. If you have a CPAP machine and can't breathe through the night because of brain fart. What's the word I'm looking for here?
Sleep apnea.
Sleep apnea. Then a power outage can be a deadly experience for you. And we had people die last year due to those power outages. So I think that COVID paired with climate change here is just like 2020 playing some extra fun tricks on everybody. And we saw it coming. We knew it was going to happen. To the second part of your question, what can our nation do? What concrete steps can we take? There's been this really incredible push in the last few years to tell people about all these little steps they can do. Let's cut out like straws and the various things that you can do to reduce your waste. And well, I think that it's kind of admirable for people to try to take that on. It's mathematically just brutally inaccurate. The vast majority of plastic waste comes from like fishing and like soda bottles. And if we actually held the companies accountable that produce these things, and I said, hey, you know what, for every ton of this that we have, and that's an easily measurable thing that we can do, which doesn't nearly account for the mass of it on the ground outside, we should start taxing the bejesus out of them. We could find ways to incentivize companies to produce better things or take responsibility for them. And we have great examples of that from Crayola, for instance. If you have markers, even if they're not Crayola markers, you can send them into Crayola and they will dispose of them appropriately for you. If we started incentivizing programs like that for a lot of the major companies that are responsible for a lot of the major contributions to climate change, we might actually make a big dent in this.
That's a very good point. There's going to have to be some substantial action taken, and and some of that's going to be a way to drastically change behaviors. So thank you for your contribution. And I believe Amanda actually had something to add on to that was very relevant to that statement. So Amanda, take it away.
Yeah. So in terms of kind of putting this on companies, I don't know how accurate this is, but I read something this week about how the term carbon footprint was coined by BP.
Of course.
And I'm sorry?
Of course it was.
Yeah. And again, I haven't independently verified this, and they started this campaign. A lot of us remember it like, ooh, what's your carbon footprint? Track your carbon footprint. And it put it onto the individual. When we have all these companies where even if individuals were to make a change in their own personal lives, it won't even make a dent in the actual carbon footprint that all of these companies are creating. And I don't have the exact number in front of me, but they tracked emissions during the initial part of shutdown because people weren't driving anymore, and it reduced it by like a single digit percentage. Like it was
it's
so
nominal.
marginal. Yeah, it was so marginal that it, you know, why are we putting it on individuals? And I know it's important for us morally to say, you know, okay, I'm going to eat less red meat because of the environmental impact of the, you know, the cattle industry. But again, that's still putting it on the individual. It's not solving the overarching problem of the fact that these companies are so powerful and they have such powerful lobbying groups that they can stay an important part of, you know, the world and the way we feed people. So, or, you know, get gas or, you know, whatever the issue is. So yeah, the companies, I think that's where we need to make the change, is in some way regulating them or taxing them, or I'm not an expert on this area. So, but that's where I see it.
No, that's a great point, Amanda. Thank you very much. And I had a specific question for Robert, because I just want to just preface this is, you know, I really appreciate your libertarian views, because I think it's a voice that needs to be heard in a really great perspective. And so I wanted to actually phrase it this way. So Robert, from a libertarian perspective, what are your thoughts on climate change, and what libertarian-minded solutions do you think that you would implement, or that could be implemented in your ideal libertarian response to the climate crisis?
Yeah, that's a hard one, because I think that the libertarian aspect is the exact opposite of actually the government enforcing anything. I think that one thing that we have to look at as libertarians is something what we call, or as anybody, is what they call the Kuznets curve, which is it's a type of bell curve that it period over time and how much pollution is emitted. And as societies progress over time, as they start to grow, like the industrial area, we had a lot of pollution, and now we are on the back end of the pollution. And as we start to advance society through free market exchange of ideas, whether it's solar power or whatever it may be, but by letting the free market implement ideas to protect our environment, I think is the number one thing that will advance us into a more healthier society for Earth.
Okay.
So I don't really agree with aspects of the government creating regulations, because what happens is most of the time it's the small mom and pop shops that are harmed in the end, while the big corporations can have the money to refit the diesel trucks and rebuild all the engines for the trucks so they pass the emissions, when it's a small time shop that can't pay the $70,000 to do that. So I think that by the free market getting in there with solar power and wind power is the way that we advance to help protect Mother Earth.
This is very insightful. Can I pose one follow-up question to you on that?
Most certainly.
What are some ways, you know, theoretically, that we could encourage and help the free market make these type of changes without subsidizing them?
I think exactly by not subsidizing them, because the subsidies usually, you know, help the big corporations. I think the way we go about it is, you know, letting people like Elon Musk or whoever it may be, the next genius kid in science class, figure out the solution that it may need to get us there. I mean, I don't have an exact example on climate change, but when we look at different aspects of the free market, whether it's, you know, Elon Musk taking us to space and comparing it to how NASA and the government has done it, it's usually the private investors that get us there for cheaper and quicker. So I think if we rely on more of the private investors, it will get us there quicker than any government agency ever could. But I can't fully answer your question because I couldn't think of, I don't have the answer for it. I just think that it would be the private market and the investors that would get us there quicker than government.
No, that's very fair. I definitely appreciate the perspective, which is why I want to bring it in. So thank you so much. And I believe we have Tyler on queue. Tyler, what you got for us?
So for me, I do. I am on the same point with Robert in that the free market should lead the way on this, but by taxing them and or giving them subsidies only hurts the consumer or low income people. Whenever we give them a tax or a fine or anything like that, they just pass it on in terms of consumer pricing. So I don't think that wouldn't necessarily create the change that we want, because yeah, you tax everybody, you fine the corporations, then they pass it on in terms of prices, and us as the individual consumer or low income people will look at that as like, well, that's more expensive, I don't really want to buy that, I'm going to buy the cheaper things from other countries, or not buy anything at all that they need because it's too expensive. And other countries, as we've learned, they contribute just as much to this as we do, or some countries do, if not more. But if we can get it from cheaper from them, we're going to do that, and it just hurts businesses here.
So as a follow-up to that, thank you for that take, Tyler. As a follow-up, what would you say to those that feel that corporations and have for too long gotten away with underregulation? When we're talking about rivers that are set on fire, when we're talking about methane emissions, when we're talking about pollutant of groundwater, and right now we have an EPA and a regulatory environment that are not holding them accountable. At the very least, if we're not going to talk about taxing them into existence and reusing those funds to from a government approach, but at least what would you say about holding corporations accountable with adequate regulation to make sure that our groundwater and our rivers and our lands aren't polluted?
Oh no, trust me, I come from a product of I come from a place where coal ash goes into your water. You can't drink it, or you can't shower in it. You can't bathe in it. You can't do anything with it. You have nitroglycerin eating the foundations of buildings. You have a chemical plant that my great grandmother worked at a hospital. It was the Black Hospital, and because it's West Virginia. Her hospital basically melted into the ground because of the chemicals that were seeping into the foundation. So she didn't have a place to work anymore. It was a condemned building. It's something that we definitely need to look at for that, for sure, in terms of making sure that the pollutants that we're putting out and the chemicals that we're putting out in the atmosphere or into the ground or whatever, we need to make sure that that is taken care of. But I mean, just finding or taxing people to just so we can have clean energy, or cleaner energy, I should say, with solar panels, which is hit or miss right now. It's not necessarily the efficiency that we need to be able to take care of what we need in terms of energy. But yeah, we can't necessarily just tax people out of existence, because that just gives us more money that could be used for other things or mismanaged or whatever. It's not what we need.
Oh, fair, very, very fair take. Thank you very much, Connor. Jules.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a bit of an issue with saying the free market should just take care of the issue, because the free market is what's resulted in gigantic catastrophes like 3 Mile Island and the BP spill and a myriad of other gigantic environmental disasters that have been caused by the consistent deregulation of industry, and saying, well, we don't really care what you do as long as you continue to increase your profit margin. And they will. As long as they don't have to worry about what chemicals are pumping into the ocean, as long as they don't have to care about, oh, well, the coral bleaching in Australia, the coral bleaching in everywhere, which is a huge catastrophic problem within the ecosystem of the ocean. They're never going to care about that if they're making money. And if the government doesn't say, oh, you got to stop dumping chemicals into the ocean, they're not going to stop. because it's easier, cheaper, and more effective for them that shit in the ocean. Oh no, we had an oil spill. Shit, we'll try and clean that up. I mean, BP, the whole oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, this is all free market stuff. I mean, yeah, the free market that, you know, the whole idea of the trickle down effect economic wise, that's a free market idea. It doesn't work. You have to regulate these industries. If you don't regulate them, they will go the greedy route. That is capitalism. That is how capitalism works. You can't just let capitalism go and say, go do what you want and try to do the right thing. It'll work if you do the right thing. No, you have to make them do the right thing or they won't.
No, that's a great take. I definitely appreciate that, Jules. We're going to go to Charles. Charles, I want to read you a comment from Daniel Levy, and I would like you to take a crack at that as well as share anything else that's on your mind. So here's from Daniel. Hearing the comments that Tyler and Robert are making, it seems like the solution for the issues they're bringing up, i.e. small business suffering more, costs being passed on to consumers, doesn't that imply that we need more comprehensive regulation? Not none. Jules addressed a lot of that, but I just wanted to see what your thoughts on this specific question from Daniel, and by all means, let's hear your thoughts overall.
Exactly what I was going to say. I worked in the oil field in Texas for 10 years, and I worked in all the refineries. I did, I went in and I changed the, during the shutdowns, I changed all the, I can't even think of the cracker machines. And we would take out the catalyst and they would ship it off to another site who would wash it and then, you know, recycle it. But now when they washed it, they put it in a pool and it just went into the ground. They say it was, you know, contained, but we knew it wasn't because we could see it when we passed by, driving by there. So, I know for a fact that the big companies need regulation more than anything because they're just doing what they have to do. They're passing it on to us saying that, well, we paid for this when they're really just dumping it back in there. You know, a lot of the oil companies are making plastic, shipping it overseas, and if the boat sinks, it's just sunk.
Wow.
And then they're talking about, you know, all the plastic that's in the ocean. Not all of it is stuff that we as consumers throw in there. A lot of it is the stuff that they have already shipped, sink, fall off the boat. You know, it's so many containers that fall off of those big ships and are underground. I mean, under the water right now. That's contaminating that water because there's no regulation to make them go and get it up. Cars coming from Japan, they're down in the bottom of the ocean. You call them coral reefs, but they're contaminating things because they're rusting.
Wow.
You know, so there's a lot of things we need to hold the major companies accountable for and stop trying to put it on the consumers. I mean, you know, I'm one of those that got COPD, and so I have a generator and solar panels because I need to be able to put my CPAP on and everything else, you know. And I have it bad enough to where I have a nebulizer at home too. So, yeah.
Wow.
That's it.
Thank you for your perspective on that. I want to go back to Robert for a brief rebuttal. Robert, take it away.
I think the first thing I want to say is that hopefully nobody is calling for the absolute deregulation of the market. While some of us may be libertarian, I still believe that certain aspects that the government is there to do is to protect our citizens. And so by companies polluting our waterways and polluting our air is a straight violation of the non-aggression principle, which is the number one thing that libertarians follow. So I'm not calling for the absolute deregulation of corporations for the environment, but I do think that there are some some regulations that we could do away with, and letting more of the free market take its toll, or not toll, because the toll sounds like a bad thing. But I think that the main thing is that we don't want to, by polluting waterways, it's a straight attack on Americans. And so that's what us libertarians believe, is that the government is here to protect us from threats, whether it may be overseas or it may be polluting our airways, which is, giving people lung cancer, or, giving people diseases that kill them. And so I believe that the government should 100% protect us in certain aspects.
That's a good take. Thank you. Thank you, Robert. And I know, Tyler, you also had a quick point that you want to jump back in on. Take it away.
I was going to say more regulation doesn't necessarily bring in more results. Our government sometimes can be too big to make any moves and make any changes that we need. So just because we need to fix something doesn't necessarily mean we need to put more regulation on it. So that I would say that would be where I want to end it at there, because everybody's talking about more regulations, more fines, more taxes, more everything. It doesn't necessarily give us the result that we want. But as Robert said, we shouldn't just dismantle the fact that, hey, we need to keep our water clean, we need to keep our air clean, we need to keep our ground clean. That there can be rules and guidelines for that, but necessarily just creating catch-all laws about everything doesn't necessarily.
No, these are great takes, and Robert, Tyler, I definitely appreciate both of your counter arguments, and I think what you're both getting to is, that there needs to be a balance of, being environmentally, regulatory and sound, but also making sure that things aren't stifled. I think that's a fair assessment that we can bring up in ways to be efficient and be smart, and so that's always worth agreeing, worth looking into. So I thank you both for that. And so I believe Charles wanted to get another take in, and also get Jake in as well.
Yes, I don't think that we need to do more regulation. I just think we need to have them more accountable, with the regulations that we have, because they're violating them by paying the fines. That's not doing anything for us either. It's not about money. It's about Mother Earth. And
so as a follow-up to that, Charles, if the fines aren't working and they're not having the desired effect, what are things as far as enforcement mechanisms to try to, to get this change in behavior that they're not polluting our water and our air and our ground?
Okay, see, this is the thing that I've seen. Whenever a company doesn't follow the regulation, one of the bigger companies come in and buy them out, and then they have to go with the regulations. In Houston, there's quite a few small companies that had to be bought out because they would not follow the EPA regulations. And when they bring someone in, they had to go and do it and follow the guidelines. So what they were doing, they were bringing barges into these places, filling the barges with the waste, and then shipping it to another refinery that processed the waste and make other things out of it, like take the plastics, the things that they can't use at the refinery, they take it and they take that and make plastic, or those little brown balls that you have in your I don't know what you call them. Whenever you buy something, they pack that stuff up. So, there's ways to control it.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that needs to be looked into as part of a comprehensive approach. So I want to go to Jake next. Jake, you got a take you want to get to us?
Yeah, we've been talking about different ways to help tame the market, and whether we should remove regulations or enforce regulations, and there's all these interesting takes on whether regulations are a good thing or not, and which ones matter. And I think that the key term here is a well-regulated market. Doesn't necessarily mean overly regulated or brutally regulated. It means these regulations are well designed. Mm-hmm. The market is a horrifying, evil monster that cares about one thing. And if we don't tame that to care about us, it won't. It'll produce toys that are made out of toxic materials for little kids to eat. And we've seen that happen. So regulate it so that it does what it should and performs for us, not so that we perform for it.
And Jake, I want to follow up on that one as well, because just, you know, from a progressive standpoint, I believe a lot of reasons that are talked about for certain regulation or certain investments or taxes is to actually be able to convert over to a cleaner energy, and that's also can theoretically create lots of new, blue collar, working class, unionized jobs. Because I think, I wish Sham was here for this when we talk about automation and the future and, industries that are kind of going by the wayside as the future holds. We need new opportunities for new industry to take hold. What are your thoughts on that from an economic perspective?
I mean, we face some pretty crazy times, and the humorous pessimist in me is like, oh, it's the apocalypse, who cares? But the more realistic side says, without a true world-ending apocalypse, the simple nature of information technology is exponential growth. So it doesn't matter what we do as long as we don't wipe ourselves out. Technology is going to progress in some ways that, 30 years ago in school they said you won't have a pocket calculator, but right now I can ask the corner of my room what time it is anywhere on the planet, or any math equation I want. It'll tell me just because it's connected to the internet. So if you look at that level of growth compared to the previous 30 years, just get a guess for what we're headed for in the next 30. I think that the chances that we don't find some major solutions to problems that we face are astronomically small. I mean, if you want to get real nerdy about it, in terms of the stages of civilization based on energy consumption, we're at about 0.6 to 0.7 out of 1, where 1 would be full utilization of our planet's capacity. And we're maybe 150 years away from that if Moore's law, which is the exponential rate of gain of information technology, persists. And it's not. We're already well outstripping it with current technology. So I think that technology will answer a ton of our problems. We just need to not let the implicit greed of the world at hand take control of, a big gain in technology is a big gain in money. And that stuff needs to be standardized so that everybody benefits from it.
Thank you, Drake. What a great take. What a great segment. And we are now gonna move on to the last stages of our broadcast. Now we're going to go into our fun topic, and we are actually going to have Jake, I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to have you lead us in our fun topic.
So for today's fun topic, we are going to talk about what movie was most formative and in what way. So,
wait, could you elaborate on that question? Like, what do you mean by formative?
Well, okay, so you can define that how you want. Maybe it helped you form your humor, or maybe it gave you some inspiration in some way. So whatever for you, whatever movie you pick to be most formative. And super open to why. You can be, it could be pure humor. I'm fine with that.
Okay.
I'll start because I'm fine with the pure humor. My movie is Basketball, hands down. That movie, I didn't even realize it, but when I was maybe 10 to 14, I watched it a lot, and rewatching it maybe 2 years ago, I'm 32 now, I was forced to realize that the cadence of their humor, the delivery of their jokes has bled into how I do my own humor in a big way. So thank you, Trey Parker and Matt Stone. You guys are awesome. Robert, why don't you take it next?
I think my movie would have to be Silence of the Lambs, because the Buffalo Bill tuck is what got me famous at parties. So I would have to go with that as my choice.
Deja's face.
That's awesome.
Goodbye, horses.
Okay, Amanda, what do you got?
I love it.
Okay, I'm gonna take it from Silence of the Lambs to Beauty and the Beast.
Hey.
So I mean, like, I could
Which
pick
version?
something like really the Disney cartoon, not the animated. So the way I'm taking this is I very personally identified with Belle growing up. We're both brunettes. We both have green eyes, and we're both people who love to read and are thinkers. And so that was something that, like, my dream as a little girl was, I want that library. Like, that's what I want. And I recognize she's undergoing Stockholm syndrome, but she doesn't settle. You know, she has Gaston, who's like, be my wife, we'll raise all these boys, I'll do everything, whatever, except for, you know, actual housework or anything like that. And she was like, no thanks, right? So like, she was always someone who I looked up to, even though she was a fictional character. And I had Belle everything. I had, you know, the dolls, the clothing. I loved singing all the songs. And so Beauty and the Beast was something for me that, like, I looked up, that's who I wanted to be. I wanted to be like strong like her and intelligent like her. So, yeah.
Kylan, what's your choice movie?
Oh man, so I consider myself deep down a warrior, you know, fighting, battling, swashbuckling. And so one of my favorite movies of all time is Braveheart. And, you know, I go straight to this line right here. Look at you. I'm ashamed that you called yourself Scotsman's. You squabbled for the scraps from the Longshanks table when you've missed your God-given right for something better. You think the people of Scotland exist to provide you with wealth and possession. I believe that justice entitles you to provide the people of Scotland with freedom, and I go to see that they have it.
I can't believe that you had that whole thing memorized.
All right, Kylan.
Wow, impressive.
Okay, Charles.
Yeah, mine's Coolie High.
Ooh.
Man, it just reminds me of how I grew up, you know, and the things that I saw growing up.
What'd you see?
Just like, gotta pull one out for my boys, you know. No.
Thank you. Stasia?
So mine is actually Rashomon.
Oh, that's a good one.
What was it?
Rashomon.
That was mine. God damn it.
Akira Kurosawa.
Oh, great. Awesome.
So when I first saw that, I remember watching it with my dad when I was probably like 8. And him kind of explaining to me, and you know when you're a kid and you just think that, like, things are, and there's a truth and there's everything else is false. And that movie, and like really trying to like wrap my head around how subjective life is, just really blew my mind.
I'm surprised you didn't pick Harry Potter.
I almost picked Legally Blonde.
Yeah.
All right, Jules. I'm sorry you're on the spot so quickly, but Tyler ditched, so.
Well, you know what? That was mine too. Was Rashomon, and I didn't think anybody was gonna pull out some Akira Kurosawa. Okay, I'll say Seven Samurai. Seven Samurai is a classic action movie. It doesn't have as much significance to me as Rashomon because, as Stasia said, it's and I guess it makes sense because you work in a legal office, and it shows how, you know, different accounts can be so different from how reality is, and how reality is this sort of different idea for every single individual. Okay, that was mine. But anyway, Seven Samurai is one of the most entertaining movies you will ever watch. It is paced like a modern movie, and it's been remade countless times. The movies, the Magnificent Seven is a remake of Seven Samurai. They've remade it twice, actually. I love that movie. And it's a wonderful movie, and I couldn't love it enough. Rashomon. Oh shit, that was mine too. I'm so upset. But it's a great account of how how everybody's individualism is a perception of within themselves, and how everybody looking at them, because the beginning of the movie, I'll go further, Nastasia. The beginning of the movie and sort of the idea of what it is these three guys discussing these accounts of this one crime, and how every account was different. And it really showed me how there's so many sides to every story. And I think that's an important fact within what we're talking about every other week on this podcast, that there's always a different idea that somebody else is feeling, that somebody else experienced something in a completely different way. And that's so important in having a reasonable discourse with another person, is you don't know what they experienced, and you don't know the guy who committed the crime that you're accusing. Well, what was his experience? How did he feel? And I mean, in Rashomon, they even go as far as to have a seance and resurrect the guy who was killed, and his side of the story is so completely different too. And it's an amazing film that everybody should watch, and especially in legal circles, I'm sure it's very important too.
You did it a lot more justice than I did.
That's fair.
Bravo, Jules. All right, Tyler, what's your most formative movie experience? Hey, nicely done.
Lion King.
The Lion King.
Bravo.
Is that intentional?
That was totally intentional.
I love
Very
it.
nice. Very nice.
The Lion King was my most formative movie. It gave me a lot of my humor from Timon and Pumbaa. Just a lot of my chill and my level-headedness come from that movie. So Hakuna Matata, it's all me.
A wonderful phrase.
It's totally a wonderful phrase.
I want to take this moment and shout out to Hannah for being our excellent comment moderator, and she sent in her movie response, which is The Little Mermaid, the adventuring of it. She loved the song, dreamer, similar red hair. She wanted to get out of the world she knew and explore the world she was sheltered from.
And I will not leave Daniel Levy. Daniel Levy has Fern Gully, inspired both
Right on.
a love of the environment, which we need, and confusing feelings about Tim Curry. Oh,
Sure.
That's true of every movie he's in.
Well, we know if Greg were here, he would tell us his favorite was Rocky Horror Picture Show, and then his favorite song is,
I think
what is it, Sweet Transvestite?
It's The Worst.
The Worst Witch, such a good Tim Curry movie.
Oh, man.
The Worst Witch.
Clue.
Classic.
All right, Kylan.
And so with that, everybody, it's been a wonderful night of debate, really impactful, really insightful. I'd like to thank everybody for their contributions tonight, for really being strong and giving great takes. I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in as always. So please, if you like what you hear, please make sure that you like and follow Project SIP, and please make sure you share the broadcast and far and wide, so we can keep building this thing into something special, because we don't just do it for us, we do it for you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.